had been studying humans for 6 months, and he still found them unremarkable. The ambassador from the Ascendant Coalition sat in his observation chamber on Station Epsilon 7, watching the human diplomatic team through the glass wall. They looked so ordinary compared to the other species in the Galactic Council. No armor plating like no multiple limbs like the Vex. Just soft skin, 2 arms, 2 legs, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. The human team consisted of 3 members. Captain was their military advisor, a man with gray hair and quiet eyes that never stopped moving. Doctor was there, a woman who could speak 12 different alien languages fluently. Then there was their young translator, who had an odd talent for reading body language across species barriers. Had written 17 reports about them. All his conclusions said the same thing: humans were average. They had decent technology. They were polite in negotiations. They followed galactic law. They were just another species trying to find their place among the stars. The council chamber was full that day. Representatives from 40 different worlds sat in their designated spaces, discussing trade routes and mineral rights. Watched as Captain sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. Doctor was reviewing documents on her data pad, was watching the delegation with an expression couldn't quite read. They were warriors, everyone knew that. They had conquered 17 species over 3,000 years. They were strong, aggressive, and proud. But they had agreed to peace when they joined the council 30 years ago. Everyone trusted the peace would hold. Then the emergency signal came through. The lights in the chamber changed to red. A priority message appeared on every screen. Felt his breathing slow as he read the words. The Dominion had launched attacks on the border colonies. Multiple worlds were under assault. Thousands were dead. Among the targeted settlements were 3 human colonies. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates were shouting, demanding answers, calling for emergency sessions. The representative sat in stony silence, offering no explanation. Watched it all with professional detachment, but his eyes kept returning to the human delegation. They were too quiet. Captain had not moved except to read the message. Doctor had set down her data pad and was staring at the delegate with an expression that made uncomfortable. Had gone completely still, like a predator that had just spotted prey. Then Captain stood up. The motion was simple, controlled, but something about it made the nearby delegates fall silent. He looked at Doctor and he didn't speak. He just nodded once. Both of them stood immediately. "We're going to war," Captain said. His voice was calm, like he was discussing the weather. "The diplomatic mission is concluded." That was all. No speeches, no demands for justice, no appeals to the council for intervention, just a simple statement of fact. Expected someone to argue, to remind them that council protocols required mediation, to explain that there were processes for this, diplomatic channels, proper procedures. But the human delegation was already walking toward the exit. Doctor paused at the door. She looked back at the representative. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Then she left. The council chamber fell into shocked silence. Made a decision in that moment. He had been studying humans from a distance, reading reports and watching recordings. But this was something new, something his reports hadn't prepared him for. He needed to see this firsthand. He requested permission to join the human fleet as an observer. His superiors approved quickly. They wanted someone to document humanity's first interstellar war. Everyone assumed it would be brief. They were experienced warriors. Humans were newcomers to galactic affairs. The war would probably end in a negotiated settlement within a few months. Packed his equipment and prepared for what he thought would be an educational experience. He arrived at the human military staging area 2 days later. The place should have been in chaos. A species going to war for the first time should be confused, scrambling, trying to organize themselves, expected to see panic and disorder. Instead, he found something that disturbed him deeply. The humans were already ready. Ships were moving into formation with practiced precision. Supply chains were operating at full capacity. Soldiers were boarding transports with the calm efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times before. Watched as Admiral, a woman with iron-gray hair and tired eyes, directed fleet movements from the command center. "Ambassador," she said when he introduced himself, "welcome aboard. You'll be assigned quarters on the flagship. You're free to observe anything except classified operations. Don't interfere with military personnel and stay out of the combat zones during engagements." "How long have you been preparing for this?" asked. Admiral looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "We're always preparing for this," she said, "every single day since we joined the council." That didn't make sense, but there was peace, they agreed to. "They are predators," Admiral interrupted. "So are we. The difference is we know what we are. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a war to run." Was taken to his quarters by a young officer named Bora. She was friendly enough, answering his questions as they walked through the ship's corridors. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Captain, a kind of watchful readiness that never relaxed. "Can I ask you something?" said as they reached his door. "Of course, Ambassador." "Why didn't your people try to negotiate? Why go straight to war?" Bora tilted her head, considering the question. "They killed 3,000 of our people in the first strike. They targeted civilian colonies. There's nothing to negotiate. They made their choice. Now we make ours." "But the council could have mediated." "The council is debating," Bora said. "While they debate, more of our people die. We don't have time for debates. We have time for action." She left him there, alone in quarters that were surprisingly comfortable, sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his recording device. He needed to document this. His superiors needed to understand what was happening. But as he tried to organize his thoughts, he realized he didn't understand it himself. Humans had rushed to war with a speed that galactic norms. They had prepared for conflict while supposedly embracing peace. They spoke of war like it was inevitable, even necessary. Looked out the viewport at the gathering fleet. Hundreds of ships, all moving with synchronized purpose. This wasn't a civilization defending itself. This was something else, something he had no frame of reference for. He began his report. Initial observations suggest human military culture is fundamentally different from known galactic species. Further investigation required. He had no idea how much further investigation would change everything he thought he knew about warfare, civilization, and survival. The fleet began moving toward space, watched the stars shift as they entered faster-than-light travel. The war had begun. The Human Military Coordination Center was nothing like expected. He had visited military installations of other species before. They were usually impressive displays of power, with gleaming weapons and soldiers standing at attention. The human facility was different. It was efficient, almost clinical, like a hospital or research station. Commander met him at the entrance. She was a short woman with sharp eyes and hands that moved constantly, gesturing as she spoke. "Ambassador, welcome to Central Command. I'm told you want to observe our operations." "If possible," said, "I'm trying to understand your approach to this conflict." Smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Our approach is simple. We assume the worst and prepare for it. Come, I'll show you what I mean." She led him through corridors filled with people working at stations, reviewing data, coordinating logistics. Everyone moved with purpose. There was no wasted motion, no confusion. Had expected the frenzy of a civilization suddenly thrust into war. Instead, he saw the calm efficiency of a machine that had been running for years. "This is our simulation center," said, opening a door to a massive chamber filled with holographic displays. "We run war games every single day. Every species we've encountered, we've simulated conflicts with them, including the..." Stared at the displays. They showed battle scenarios, fleet movements, casualty projections. You've been planning to fight the... We've been planning to fight everyone, said casually. Not because we want to, because we might have to. Every neighbor is a potential enemy. Every alliance is temporary. Trust is nice, but preparation keeps you alive. That's incredibly pessimistic. Shrugged, we call it realistic. Our history taught us some hard lessons. We learned that peace is fragile and violence is always possible, so we prepare. She pulled up a display showing the fleet formations. We've known their tactics for years. We know their ship designs, their communication protocols, their standard engagement ranges. We've been ready for this war since the day we met them. Felt a chill run through him. Does the council know you do this? The council doesn't ask, so we don't tell, but we're not breaking any laws. War games aren't illegal. Preparation isn't aggression. We just take it more seriously than most species. Next, took him to meet Engineer Hay, a nervous man who spoke quickly and seemed to exist on pure caffeine. His workspace was cluttered with technical diagrams and equipment schematics. Ambassador, yes, hello, welcome, said you wanted to understand our systems. Hay didn't wait for an answer. Our entire military operates on what we call the redundancy doctrine. Everything has backups. Every backup has backups. Every ship can function with 60% of its systems destroyed. Every plan has 3 alternatives. We never, ever rely on a single point of failure. He pulled up a schematic of a human warship. See this? It looks like a standard frigate, but the hull is built on a military-grade frame. The engines have triple redundancy. The weapons systems can be manually operated if the computers fail. Even our civilian ships follow this design philosophy. Why? Asked. This must be incredibly expensive. Hay looked at him like he'd asked why people needed to breathe. Because if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. Murphy's Law. We plan for failure because failure is always an option. Success is what happens when you've planned for every possible failure. Admiral found later that day in the observation deck. She stood next to him, watching the fleet assemble through the viewport. Hundreds of ships were moving into formation, a process that should have taken weeks but was happening in mere days. You look troubled, Ambassador, she said. I'm trying to understand, admitted. Your people seem to have been preparing for war while publicly pursuing peace. It seems contradictory. Was quiet for a moment, then she said, let me show you something. She led him to a secure room and activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air between them, images of Earth, but not the Earth had seen in the cultural databases. These were older images, darker. This is our history, said quietly. This is what made us what we are. Watched scenes of conflict unfold, armies clashing with primitive weapons, cities burning, weapons of mass destruction turning landscapes into wasteland. Again and again, humans fighting humans, dying by the millions, nearly destroying themselves. We almost went extinct 6 times, said. 6 separate occasions where we came close to wiping ourselves out. Wars over resources, ideology, territory, religion. We fought each other with everything we had, and somehow we survived. The images shifted to show recovery, cities rebuilding, people helping each other, technology advancing. But always in the background there were weapons, armies, defenses. We learned something from all that death, continued. We learned that hopping for peace isn't enough. We learned that the species that survives is the one that prepares for the worst while hopping for the best. We learned that if you want peace, you have to be ready for war. But they had been peaceful for 30 years, said. Yes, and then they attacked, which proves our point exactly, closed the display. We joined the Galactic Council in good faith. We wanted to explore, to learn, to trade. We meant every word of our peace treaties, but we also prepared for this moment, because history taught us that peace is something you have to defend, not just declare. Your entire economy is built around this preparation, observed. Your civilian infrastructure, your education system, everything has a military component. Not a military component, corrected. A survival component. We teach our children basic combat skills the same way we teach them mathematics. Not because we want warriors, but because we want survivors. We build our cities with evacuation plans and emergency protocols. We train our population in crisis response. It's not about aggression. It's about resilience. Thought about his own people, the Ascendant Coalition. They had known peace for 3,000 years. Their military was ceremonial, mostly for show. The idea of every citizen being trained for conflict was alien to him. Do you ever worry that this constant preparation will make war more likely? He asked. Smiled sadly. Every single day. It's a balance we struggle with constantly. But here's the thing, Ambassador. They didn't attack us because we were prepared. They attacked us because we have something they want and they thought we were weak enough to take it from. Our preparation didn't start this war. It's just going to help us end it. Over the next few days, observed the final stages of mobilization. He watched as the human military machine moved into full operation. Supply chains that had seemed commercial revealed their military purpose. Civilian factories retooled to produce weapons in hours. Transport networks shifted to military logistics without missing a beat. He met soldiers preparing to deploy. Young people like Bara, who he'd met earlier, checking their equipment with practiced hands. They weren't excited for war. He saw no bloodlust, no eagerness for violence. Instead, he saw grim determination. They knew people would die. They knew some of them wouldn't come home, but they were going anyway. "Why do you fight?" asked one young soldier named. Looked up from checking his rifle. "Because someone has to. Because they killed our people, and if we don't stop them, they'll kill more. It's not about glory or honor. It's about survival. Theirs or ours. I choose ours." Simple, direct. No grand speeches about duty or destiny. Just cold logic and the will to act on it. On the fourth day, the fleet was ready. 72 hours from declaration of war to full mobilization. Had studied galactic military history. Most species took months to prepare for major conflicts. Some took years. Humans had done it in 3 days. Admiral gave the order to move out. The fleet began its journey toward space. Stood in the observation deck, watching the stars blur as they entered faster-than-light travel. He recorded another report for his superiors. Human military preparation is unlike anything in galactic records. They maintain a constant state of readiness that other species would find unsustainable. Their entire civilization is built around the assumption that peace is temporary and conflict is inevitable. This is not a warrior culture. This is a survivor culture, and there may be a significant difference between the two. He paused the recording and looked out at the fleet surrounding the flagship. All those ships, all those people, all of them moving toward battle with calm certainty. For the first time, wondered if the Council had made a mistake, not in allowing humans to join, but in underestimating what it meant to invite survivors into a galaxy of warriors. Survivors didn't fight for honor, they fought to live. And they would do absolutely anything to ensure they kept living. The Battle of Station Harmony began 12 days after the war started. Stood in the observation bay of the human flagship, watching as the fleet appeared on the long-range sensors. There were over 300 ships, organized in perfect geometric formations. The Dominion had been fighting wars for 3,000 years. They knew what they were doing. The human fleet numbered just under 100 ships. They were outnumbered 3-1. Commander stood at her station, studying the enemy positions with focused intensity. Around her, officers called out readings and updates. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. No one was panicking. "They're moving into standard battle formation," one officer reported. Dreadnoughts at the center, cruisers on the flanks, fighters in screening positions. "Predictable," said quietly. She pulled up a tactical display. "They're following the manual exactly. Formation Delta 7, we've simulated this 1,000 times. Admiral's voice came through the communications system. All ships, this is Admiral. They think they're fighting a standard engagement. They're about to learn they're wrong. Execute protocol chaos. Had studied galactic warfare. Every species followed certain rules. You maintained formation. You matched shield strength against shield strength. You engaged at approved distances. You gave enemies a chance to surrender. These were the civilized rules of war, developed over of interstellar conflict. The human fleet ignored every single rule. Instead of forming a defensive line, the human ships scattered. They broke formation completely, each ship moving independently at speeds that made sensors scream warnings. The G-forces they were pulling should have killed the crews, but the ships kept accelerating, pushing limits that no sane species would attempt. "Why are they breaking formation?" asked, alarmed. "They're making themselves vulnerable." Didn't look up from her console. "We're making ourselves unpredictable. Tactics rely on formation fighting. They expect organized resistance. We're not giving them that." The fleet maintained its formation, adapting to engage the scattered human ships. It was the logical response. It's what any military commander would do. Then the humans did something had never seen in any war he'd studied. Launching kinetic strikes, an officer announced. Watched in horror as the human fleet released what looked like asteroids. But these weren't natural rocks. They were guided projectiles, accelerated to incredible speeds. The humans had found asteroids in the system, attached engines to them, and were now using them as weapons. The rocks hit the formation at relativistic speeds. When something moving that fast hits a shield, the shield doesn't matter. The kinetic energy is too great. 3 dreadnoughts disappeared in explosions of light and debris. That's not standard warfare," stammered. "No," agreed, "it's effective warfare." The fleet tried to adjust, moving to avoid the kinetic strikes. But as they moved, the scattered human ships attacked from unexpected angles. They weren't staying at safe engagement distances. They were getting close, dangerously close, weaving through debris fields that should have destroyed them. A young pilot named led a squadron through a field of wreckage from the destroyed dreadnoughts. Watched the pilot's camera feed in disbelief. The ships were dodging debris at speeds that left no room for error. One wrong move and they would be destroyed. "You're insane," another pilot's voice came through the comm. "That's a suicide run." "Only if I die," replied calmly, emerging on the other side of the debris field directly behind a cruiser. His weapons fired at point-blank range, punching through the rear shields before the cruiser could react. This wasn't warfare as understood it. This was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Then the humans deployed their next surprise. Swarms of small drones launched from the human ships, thousands of them, each guided by artificial intelligence. The drones moved in coordinated patterns, targeting the ship's weapon systems with surgical precision. "You're using AI in combat?" asked, shocked. "That's prohibited by galactic convention. It's considered dishonorable." Finally looked at him. "We're not here for honor, Ambassador. We're here to win." The fleet was in disarray. Their formations were broken. Their command structure was confused. They had expected a conventional battle and received anything but. Human ships darted in and out of weapons range, using tactics that were unpredictable and aggressive. Then came the boarding actions. Watched in disbelief as a human assault ship deliberately rammed into a dreadnought. The 2 ships locked together, and hatches opened. Human soldiers poured into the enemy vessel. Their boarding couldn't believe what he was seeing, in the middle of a fleet battle. "Lieutenant Bora's team," said with something like pride in her voice. "Best boarding specialists in the fleet." The camera feeds from inside the ship showed close combat, the kind of fighting that civilized species had moved past centuries ago. Human soldiers in powered armor fighting warriors deck by deck, corridor by corridor. It was brutal and efficient. Bora's voice came through the comm channel. Deck 3 secured, moving to engineering, encountering heavy resistance but nothing we can't handle. Why fight like this? Asked. You have superior long-range weapons, why get close? Smiled grimly. Because we're good at it. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We fought each other hand to hand for thousands of years before we invented guns. Close combat is in our bones. They are stronger than us individually, but we're faster, more adaptable, and we work together better. In close quarters, we have the advantage. Another human tactic revealed itself. The scattered ships weren't moving randomly. They were herding the fleet, pushing them toward specific positions, and in those positions the humans had planted traps, mines, hidden weapons platforms, ambush points. They were experienced warriors, but they were fighting a species that rewrote the rules with every engagement. Every time they adapted to one tactic, the humans switched to another. Watched as a commander attempted to organize a counterattack. It was a sound strategy, a textbook response to the chaos, but the humans had predicted it. They had simulated this exact scenario in their war games. The counterattack moved into a kill zone, and human ships emerged from hiding to strike. How are you doing this? Asked. How are you outmaneuvering warriors who have fought for 3? Because they're warriors, said. Warriors have traditions, they have honor codes, they fight the way they've always fought. We're not warriors, ambassador, we're survivors, and survivors adapt. We use whatever works, whatever gives us an edge. We don't care about fighting fair, we care about going home alive. The battle raged for 6 hours. It should have been a victory. They had superior numbers, better positioning, more experience. But the humans turned every advantage into a weakness. They used this formation discipline against them. They exploited their predictable tactics. They attacked in ways that made conventional defense impossible. When Bora's team took the flagship's engineering section, the battle effectively ended. Without their command ship, the fleet fell into confusion. Ships began to retreat, jumping to faster-than-light travel to escape. The humans let them go. They didn't pursue the fleeing ships. Why not chase them? Asked. You could destroy more of their fleet. We're not here to commit genocide, Admiral's voice came through the comm. We're here to stop the invasion. They're retreating. That's what we wanted. Let them tell their commanders what happened here. Let them spread fear. As the battlefield cleared, looked at the wreckage. Ships destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had taken casualties too, but far fewer than should have been possible against a force 3 times their size. Final casualty report, an officer announced. 14 ships lost, 32 damaged but operational. Estimated enemy losses at 97 ships destroyed or disabled, including their flagship. Leaned back in her chair, exhausted. Not bad for our first real space battle. First real battle, repeated. You've done this before. Against ourselves in simulations, said. We knew what we were capable of. We just hadn't had a chance to prove it to anyone else. Recorded his observations, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Human combat doctrine violates every principle of civilized warfare. They use weapons considered too terrible for honorable use. They employ tactics that put their own lives at extreme risk. They adapt faster than any species I've studied. Most disturbing of all, they show no hesitation in deploying these methods. He paused, trying to find the right words. They are warriors fighting a war. The humans are survivors fighting for survival. These are not the same thing. Warriors have limits, survivors have none. Through the viewport, he watched as human ships began search and rescue operations. They were looking for survivors, both their own and, even after the brutal combat, they were trying to save lives. I don't understand you, said Tu. You fight with such violence, then show mercy to the defeated. Stood up, stretching tired muscles. We fight violently because we want the war to end quickly. Every day of war means more people die. So we hit hard, we hit fast, and we make the enemy afraid to continue. But we're not monsters, Ambassador. We don't enjoy killing. We just do what's necessary to protect what's ours. Looked at her, this small human who had orchestrated such chaos. The galaxy is going to fear you, he said quietly. Good, replied. Maybe next time they'll think twice before attacking us. 6 months into the war, had stopped trying to predict human behavior. Every time he thought he understood them, they did something that challenged his assumptions. The Battle of Station Harmony had been their first major victory. It had not been their last. The Dominion was learning what it meant to fight humans. They were learning slowly, painfully, through defeat after defeat. Followed Colonel's campaign through the outer colonies. Was a thin man with dark circles under his eyes and a reputation for never stopping. His fleet had been in continuous operation for 97 days without rest. Colonel, don't your crews need recovery time? Asked during one of their brief conversations. Looked at him with tired eyes. The don't rest. Why should we? We rotate crew members for sleep, but the ships keep moving. Every hour we stop is an hour the enemy uses to prepare. We can't give them that advantage. But human physiology requires. Human physiology is adaptable, interrupted. We can push ourselves further than our bodies want to go. It's not healthy, but neither is war. We'll rest when it's over. Watched as fleet jumped from system to system, hitting supply lines and communication networks. They never stayed long enough for them to organize a response. They struck, caused damage, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. It was exhausting just to observe. Couldn't imagine maintaining that pace for months. But the humans did. Day after day, week after week, they kept pushing. They showed a capacity for sustained effort that seemed to defy biological limitations. In the medical bay, met Dr. Myra, a combat surgeon who had been treating wounded soldiers nonstop since the war began. She was examining a soldier who should have been evacuated to a rear hospital. The man had lost his left arm in a boarding action. Why is he still here? Asked. Because I refused evacuation, the soldier said. I can still fight. Dr. Myra sighed. This is the 3rd time I've had this argument with him. Technically, he's right. With the prosthetic arm and pain management, he can return to duty, but he should be taking recovery time. Can't recover while the war is on, the soldier said stubbornly. My squad is still out there. They need every person they can get. This was a pattern saw repeatedly. Human soldiers refusing medical evacuation, returning to combat with injuries that would have ended careers for any other species. They pushed through pain and exhaustion with what Dr. Myra called adrenaline and spite. Our bodies produce these chemicals when we're in danger, she explained. Adrenaline makes us faster, stronger, blocks pain. Combined with human stubbornness, it means our soldiers can keep fighting long after their bodies should have shut down. It's not sustainable long-term, but for short periods, it's incredibly effective. Short periods, said. This war has lasted 6 months. Dr. Myra smiled grimly. Everything's relative, Ambassador. They began broadcasting surrender offers after the 4th month. Standard galactic protocol suggested that both sides would negotiate at this point. Wars were expensive. Both sides had taken casualties. A negotiated peace would save lives and resources. The humans rejected every offer. Attended a command meeting where the latest proposal was discussed. They were offering to withdraw from the border systems, pay reparations, and submit to council mediation. These are favorable terms, pointed out. You've achieved your objectives. The invasion has been stopped. General Jin looked at him with cold eyes. Our objective isn't to stop the invasion. Our objective is to make sure it never happens again. What does that mean? It means we're not stopping until the Dominion surrenders unconditionally, until they're no longer capable of threatening us or anyone else. They started this war. They chose violence. Now they'll learn what that choice costs. This concept of punitive warfare was alien too. Most galactic species fought over specific objectives: territory, resources, trade routes. Once those objectives were secured, the war ended. But humans seemed to be fighting for something different. "You're trying to teach them a lesson?" asked. "Yes," Jin said simply. "We tried diplomacy. We tried being peaceful neighbors. They attacked us anyway, killed thousands of our people. Now we're showing them why that was a mistake. The next time someone thinks about attacking humanity, they'll remember what happened to the..." It was warfare as education, warfare as deterrence, not just defeating an enemy but making an example of them. Observed economic warfare that made him deeply uncomfortable. Human special forces teams sabotaged trade routes, targeting supply convoys and manufacturing centers. They weren't just fighting the military. They were crippling the entire economy. "Isn't this excessive?" asked Commander Saul, who coordinated these operations. "Is it excessive to make sure they can't rebuild their war machine?" Saul replied. "Every factory we destroy is one less place they can build warships. Every trade route we disrupt is less money for their military. We're not targeting civilians, but we're absolutely targeting their capacity to wage war." The vindictiveness of it disturbed. This wasn't just about winning, it was personal. Yet he also observed moments that contradicted this ruthlessness. After one battle, he watched human medical teams treating wounded soldiers with the same care they gave their own. A chaplain named held memorial services for both human and dead. "Why do you grieve for the enemy?" asked. The chaplain was quiet for a moment. "Because they're still people. They made bad choices, followed bad orders, but they were still living beings with families and hopes. War is necessary sometimes, but death is always tragic. We can fight without hatting. We can kill without enjoying it." This contradiction confused. Humans fought with absolute commitment, using every possible advantage, pushing themselves past normal limits. But they also grieved. They held ceremonies for their dead. They cried. He attended a memorial service for a unit that had been lost in a failed boarding action. The commanding officer stood before the assembled soldiers, reading names. As each name was called, someone in the crowd responded, "Here, on behalf of the fallen." Watched soldiers with tears streaming down their faces, standing at attention, honoring their dead. These same soldiers would be back in combat the next day, fighting with the same intensity that had gotten their friends killed. "How do you keep going?" asked Lieutenant Bora after the service. "How do you fight so hard when you've lost so much?" Bora wiped her eyes. "Because we remember what we're fighting for. Every person we've lost is another reason to make sure this war ends. We fight hard because we want to go home. We fight hard because we want this to be the last time we have to fight. And we fight hard because that's what our fallen would want us to do." The grief fueled them. It didn't slow them down, it made them more determined. Realize something fundamental about human psychology. Other species fought despite fear and pain. Humans fought because of fear and pain. They transformed negative emotions into motivation. Grief became determination. Fear became aggression. Every loss made them more dangerous, not less. By the 8th month, the Dominion was collapsing. Their military was broken. Their economy was in ruins. Their government was in chaos. They sent desperate pleas for mercy, for negotiation, for any terms that would end the war. The humans' answer was always the same: unconditional surrender. Watched as the human fleet moved toward it was the final stage of the war. They had nowhere left to retreat. "You're going to invade their home planet?" asked Admiral. "We're going to give them one last chance to surrender," replied. "If they refuse, then yes, we'll end this war one way or another. The Council will protest. Invading is." "The Council can protest all they want," said tiredly. "Where were they when they invaded our colonies? Where were they when our people were dying? We're not fighting for the Council's approval. We're fighting to protect our own." Understood then. The humans had lost faith in galactic institutions. They had learned that when violence came, they could only rely on themselves. It was a dark lesson, but one their experience had taught them thoroughly. As the human fleet entered orbit around prepared his latest report. His hands trembled slightly as he recorded his observations. Human warfare is relentless. They fight with a commitment that borders on obsession. They grieve their losses deeply but transform that grief into determination. They refuse to stop, refuse to compromise, refuse to show weakness. This is not the behavior of a warrior culture. Warriors know honor, know when to stop, know limits. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Humans fight like a species that has been pushed to the edge of extinction and refused to fall. They fight like every battle might be their last. They fight like survivors. And survivors, I have learned, are far more dangerous than warriors, because survivors will do absolutely anything to survive. The fleet waited in orbit. They had one day to respond. Wondered what choice they would make. And he wondered what it said about the galaxy that peace could only be achieved through the threat of total destruction. The humans waited patiently. They had proven they could wait as long as necessary. And they had proven what would happen if they made the wrong choice. They hung in space like a blue and green jewel, stood in the observation deck of the human flagship, watching the planet that had been home to a warrior empire for 3,000 years. Now it was surrounded by human warships, their weapons locked on strategic targets across the surface. The ultimatum had been simple. Admiral had broadcasted on all frequencies, in every language they used: surrender completely or face bombardment. The humans had proven they were willing to use overwhelming force. Everyone knew they weren't bluffing. Had seen the firing solutions. They were ready. They had identified every military installation, every government center, every possible target. If they refused, the humans would devastate the planet. "Will you really do it?" asked quietly. The admiral stared at the planet below. "I hope we don't have to, but yes, if they force our hand, we will." "That would be terrible, tragic, a crime against civilization," finished. "I know. I've thought of nothing else for the past week, but the alternative is to let them rebuild and attack us again in 10 years. How many of my people should I sacrifice to preserve lives? How many human children should die so I can feel morally superior?" She turned to look at him. "This is what command means, Ambassador, making choices where all the options are bad and picking the least terrible one. I didn't want this war. I didn't want to threaten a planet, but they made their choice when they attacked us. Now I have to make mine." The tension on the bridge was suffocating. Officers sat at their stations, waiting. The countdown continued, 23 hours left. Then, with 6 hours remaining, the government transmitted their surrender. The relief on the bridge was visible. Shoulders relaxed. People breathed again. Saw Captain, the man who had walked out of the council chamber 9 months ago, close his eyes and whisper something that might have been a prayer. "Stand down weapons," Admiral ordered. "Prepare occupation forces. Medical teams get ready to deploy. Engineering Corps prepare to assess damage to infrastructure. We're going in." The surrender terms were absolute. The Dominion would dismantle its military to a defensive force only. They would submit to human oversight of their government for a period of 20 years. They would pay reparations for the damage they had caused. They would open their society to galactic observers to ensure compliance. Expected the occupation to be brutal. They had killed thousands of humans. Surely there would be revenge, violence, reprisals. Instead, he witnessed something that confused him more than anything else he'd seen during the war. The humans began helping. Commander Saul led the first wave of occupation forces. Instead of weapons and soldiers, she brought food, medical supplies, and construction equipment. Human engineers immediately began assessing damage to infrastructure that had been damaged during the war. "What are you doing?" asked Saul as he watched human workers repairing a power station. "Our job," Saul replied. "We defeated them militarily. Now we need to make sure they don't collapse completely. A failed state is unstable. Unstable states breed extremism and violence. We want a peaceful neighbor, not a festering wound on our border." From the original diplomatic team had returned. She worked in a field hospital, treating civilians injured in the final battles. Watched her set a broken leg for a child, speaking gently in the child's own language. "Your people killed our people," said to her. "How can you help them now?" Didn't look up from her work. "The people who made the decision to attack us are being held accountable. This child didn't make that decision. This child is just a victim of war like our children were. I became a doctor to help people, ambassador. All people." Captain was overseeing the rebuilding of a school that had been caught in the crossfire. Human soldiers worked alongside civilians, clearing rubble and salvaging what could be saved. Confronted him. "I don't understand you. 9 months ago, you walked out of a council chamber and declared war. You fought with absolute ruthlessness. You were willing to bombard this planet into submission. Now you're rebuilding their schools." Set down the piece of debris he was carrying. "We didn't want this war, ambassador. We wanted peace. We wanted to explore the galaxy and make friends. But they attacked us, so we did what we had to do. We fought hard. We fought to win. We fought to end the threat." He gestured at the ruined school. "But now the threat is ended. Now we can go back to what we actually wanted to do, building instead of destroying, helping instead of hurting. This is who we are. The war was necessary, but it wasn't who we want to be." "But you were so brutal, so relentless." "Because we wanted it to end quickly," explained. "Every day of war means more death. So we hit hard, we hit fast, and we made them afraid to continue. Not because we enjoy violence, but because we hate it. We wanted it over." Walked through the capital city in the days following the surrender. He saw human soldiers distributing food to hungry civilians. He saw human doctors treating the sick. He saw human engineers working 20-hour days to restore power and water. He also saw the trials. Military leaders who had ordered the attacks on human colonies were being held accountable. The justice was swift but fair. Humans didn't torture or execute. They documented crimes, held trials, and imposed sentences. It was methodical, legal, and somehow more terrifying than simple revenge would have been. "Why not just kill them?" asked Commander, who was overseeing the legal proceedings. "Because we're not monsters," said. "They committed crimes. They need to face justice. But justice isn't the same as revenge. We kill in war because we have to. We don't kill in peace because we want to." A young approached one day in the market. The child couldn't have been more than 12 years old. "Are you the alien who traveled with the humans?" the child asked in broken galactic common. "Yes," replied carefully. "My father said the humans are demons, that they're monsters who only know how to destroy." The child looked around at the humans working to rebuild the city. "But they fixed our hospital. They brought medicine for my mother. I don't understand." Knelt down to the child's level. "I didn't understand either, but I think I do now. Humans aren't demons or monsters. They're just survivors. And survivors know how to fight, but they also know how to heal." 3 months into the occupation, prepared his final report to the Galactic Council. He had documented everything. Every battle, every tactic, every contradiction. Now he needed to make sense of it all. He recorded his message carefully, knowing it would shape how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. "This is Ambassador of the Ascendant Coalition, submitting my final report on the human conflict. I have observed this war from beginning to end, and I must share my conclusions with the Council. Humanity is unlike any species we have encountered. They are not warriors in the traditional sense. They are warriors. Warriors have codes of honor, fight for glory, know when battles are won or lost. Humans are survivors, and survivors play by different rules. Survivors fight like they might go extinct because they have nearly gone extinct, multiple times. Their entire evolutionary history is a story of barely surviving one catastrophe after another. This has shaped them at a fundamental level. They prepare for war while hoping for peace. They maintain constant readiness because they've learned that peace is fragile. They fight with absolute commitment because they know that half measures get you killed. They use every advantage, every weapon, every tactic because survivors don't have the luxury of fighting fair. But here is what the galaxy must understand. They are not aggressive. They did not want this war. They tried diplomacy. They followed the rules. Only when attacked did they respond with violence. And when they did, they fought to win absolutely because that's the only way survivors know how to fight. I watched them rush into war with terrifying speed. I watched them deploy weapons and tactics that violated every galactic convention. I watched them fight with a relentlessness that seemed inhuman, and I finally understand why. They fight so hard because they love peace so desperately. They know what they're losing with every battle. They know the cost of war because they've paid it throughout their history. So when war becomes necessary, they fight to end it as quickly as possible, using whatever means necessary. But, and this is crucial, once the threat is eliminated, they rebuild, they heal, they help. The same hands that pulled triggers now repair schools. The same minds that planned battles now organize relief efforts. This is not hypocrisy. This is who they are. Survivors who refuse to let violence define them. The Dominion learned a terrible lesson. They learned that humanity will do anything to protect what they love. Absolutely anything. And what they love is peace, exploration, and the chance to build instead of destroy. I recommend that the Council implement what I am calling the Human Peace Accords. These accords should recognize humanity's unique approach to conflict, while also protecting other species from unprovoked human aggression, which, I must note, has never occurred. The galaxy should fear humanity, but not because they're aggressive. We should fear them because they're survivors who found hope, and they will burn down empires to protect that hope. I watched 3,000 years of warrior tradition collapse in 9 months. I watched a species that had conquered 17 civilizations surrender unconditionally to relative newcomers. They made the mistake of thinking humans were weak because they pursued peace. Let the galaxy learn from this mistake. Humans pursue peace because they understand the alternative. They know war better than any species in the Council. They've fought themselves, survived themselves, nearly destroyed themselves. They know exactly how terrible war can be, which is precisely why they're so good at it. My final recommendation: never give humanity a reason to fight, because if you do, you'll discover that the species who wanted nothing more than to be your friend will become your worst nightmare, not because they're cruel, but because they're desperate to protect what they've built. Survivors don't fight for honor or glory. They fight for survival, and there is nothing more dangerous than a species fighting to survive. Ended the recording and looked out at the human ship still orbited, but they were now delivering supplies rather than threatening destruction. Below, humans and worked side by side to rebuild what war had broken. He thought about the young child in the market, confused by the contradiction of humans who fought so hard yet helped so readily. Perhaps that was the key to understanding them. They weren't contradictory, they were complete. They could fight and heal, destroy and build, kill and save, because survivors needed all those skills to survive. 10 years later would return to the. He would see thriving cities, peaceful streets, and a generation of children who spoke both and human languages. The war would be remembered, but it would be overshadowed by the peace that followed. He would meet that same child, now a young adult studying to be a diplomat. The former child would thank him for his reports, for helping the galaxy understand both sides of the conflict, and would realize that perhaps the most remarkable thing about humans wasn't how they fought, it was how they forgave, how they moved on, how they refused to let trauma define them. Survivors didn't just survive violence, they survived the aftermath, they rebuilt, they hoped again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real reason the galaxy should never underestimate them. Not because they could destroy, but because they refused to be destroyed. Not because they knew how to fight, but because they knew why they fought. Not because they were monsters, but because they were human. And humanity, had learned, was the most terrifying and wonderful thing he had ever witnessed.